when 4 men from Vard Timber cornered a scarred Belgian Malinois chained to an unmarked government truck outside Clearwater Feed and Ranch Supply. They decided the dog looked abandoned and figured they had every right to take him. The woman who walked across the gravel lot to tell them otherwise was nothing but a county wildlife officer, barely 30 years old, and they made sure she felt every inch of that gap before they dismissed her. They were still grinning when a stranger came around the far corner of the building, and in the space of 4 seconds, what those men believed they owned began to come apart at the seams. The 3rd week of October in Clearwater County, Idaho, sits in a narrow window between the dying warmth of the high country summer and the first real violence of a northern Rockies winter. The sky over the Bitterroot Range that Tuesday morning was the color of a spent cartridge, silver, flat, and low, and the wind coming out of the northwest smelled of pine resin, wood smoke, and incoming weather. The parking lot outside Clearwater Feed and Ranch Supply was paved with old asphalt cracked by a decade of frost heave, scattered with dead fir needles and the oily gravel that always accumulates around small-town commercial buildings in mountain counties. 6 trucks were already pulled in at 8:15 in the morning, engines ticking as they cooled in the biting air. Cassidy Farlow parked her Idaho Fish and Wildlife Service truck at the end of the row, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel, finishing her mental inventory of the morning's call list. She was 28 years old, narrow-shouldered and deceptively strong, with close-cropped dark hair tucked beneath her department ball cap, and a calm, watchful quality in her brown eyes that most people read as seriousness and a few read correctly as threat assessment. She had done 4 years with the Army's 10th Special Forces Support Battalion as a certified military working dog handler before her contract ended, processed out, returned to her home state, and taken the conservation officer position 12 weeks ago. She had not stopped thinking like a soldier. She doubted she ever would. She noticed the truck before she noticed the dog. The vehicle was a battered 2005 Chevy Suburban, flat gray with peeling paint and no visible agency markings, parked at the far end of the lot near the propane exchange racks. Federal license plate, partially obscured by dried mud. The front grille carried a slight deformity along the left side, consistent with high-speed impact repair, the kind of damage that gets hammered out and painted over rather than properly replaced. A heavy-duty nylon anchor loop had been threaded through the rear passenger door handle and around the hitchball, and on the end of that loop sat a Belgian Malinois. The dog was black and tan, compact and muscular in the way that working-line Malinois always are, not the long-backed, wide-ribbed build of a show animal, but something lower, denser, tightly wound. He wore a tan tactical harness with a single handle grip and a strip of bare black Velcro across the chest panel, where a name patch had been removed. His ears were forward and rotating independently, tracking 3 sounds at once. His tail was low and horizontal, not tucked, not wagging, and he was utterly, completely motionless, the way only a dog with extreme training can be motionless, every muscle held in reserve for one purpose. A pale lateral scar ran from below his left ear down across his muzzle. Inside the left ear, when the light caught it correctly, a small alphanumeric tattoo was visible in dark ink against the pale skin of the pinner, K803 That dog was not a pet. That dog was not abandoned. Cassidy knew it at 20 yards. The 4 men standing in a loose semicircle around the Malinois were men she recognized by category, if not by face. 3 of them wore olive-drab work jackets stenciled with Vard Timber CO in faded yellow across the back. The 4th wore a canvas Carhartt vest and a battered Stetson, and stood with his arms crossed, and the particular posture of a man who had spent 60 years never being told no. That was Clifton Vard. She knew the name. Everyone in Clearwater County knew the name. Vard Timber Company held the largest private timber contract in the Northern District, operated 3 long-haul trucking routes through federal land corridors, and had a reputation for treating county ordinances as suggestions. Clifton had the wide, heavy build of a man who had been powerful in his youth and had simply never shed that sense of occupying more space than anyone else in a room. He watched the dog the way a rancher watches livestock, appraising, calculating, already deciding. Beside him stood Nash Vard, his eldest son, 23 years old, and already wearing the casual cruelty that sometimes comes with growing up as the heir to something. Nash crouched slightly, one gloved hand extended toward the dog's harness handle, grinning like it was a game. The third and fourth men, timber company employees, Ike Grubb and a younger laborer Cassidy didn't recognize, stood back a few feet, watching Nash with the idle amusement of men accustomed to watching someone else's son do the risky thing. Nash flicked a pebble at the dog's front feet. The Malinois did not move. His eyes simply shifted to Nash's hand with the calm, surgical attention of a scope acquiring a target. "He keeps pulling the lead toward that rear axle every time I walk past it," Nash was saying to his father. "That's what I'm telling you. Just back and forth, pulling toward the undercarriage. Somebody's gone and left him. The Suburban's been sitting here since before we pulled in." He stood and reached his hand toward the harness handle. "Good working lines on him. We put him on the loader yard fence line. He'll earn his keep. Don't touch that dog." Cassidy's voice was flat and direct, carrying across the lot without effort. She was still 15 feet back, walking at a measured pace. Not rushing. Rushing changes the energy in a parking lot, and she needed the energy to stay manageable for exactly as long as it took her to close the distance. Clifton Vard turned his head with the slow rotation of a man who has very rarely had cause to pay attention to a voice he didn't recognize. His eyes found Cassidy's Idaho Fish and Wildlife patch, moved to her face, and settled somewhere between dismissive and amused. "Morning, officer," he said, laying the word flat, removing all courtesy from it. "You lose a dog?" "That dog has a military working dog tattoo in his left ear and an active federal harness," Cassidy said, stopping 8 feet from Nash. She kept her hands loose at her sides. "He is not abandoned. His handler is in the vicinity. If your son puts a hand on that harness, he is going to get hurt." Nash laughed outright. He had the confident laugh of a young man who has never had a prediction about him come true that he didn't want to come true. "Game wardens," he said to Grubb over his shoulder. "Now they're dog experts." "I did 4 years as a certified MWD handler with Special Forces support," Cassidy said without heat. "I'm telling you what I know. That dog's weight is on his hind quarters right now. His nostrils are working continuously. He is not in rest posture. He is in pre-engagement posture. You put your hand on that harness, and he will take your arm." Clifton uncrossed his arms and spat into the gravel. "Young lady, I've been handling working dogs on this property since before you were born. That animal has been tied to an empty vehicle for 30 minutes in a county parking lot. That meets abandonment threshold by any measure I know. Then we can both wait for county animal control to confirm that before anyone touches him," Cassidy said. "I'm asking you to step back." Nash looked at his father. Clifton gave him a short nod, the nod of a patriarch who has decided that a correction is needed and is comfortable having someone else deliver it. Nash pulled a heavy leather work glove from his vest pocket and tugged it over his right hand. He reached forward with deliberate, ostentatious confidence and closed his fingers around the harness grip on the Malinois's back. The dog's registered name was Volt. His full designation was K8231, and he had spent 7 years working federal interdiction assignments across 7 states and 2 overseas tours. He did not require an attack command to defend his handler's operational perimeter. He required only a threat threshold to be crossed. Nash Vard's gloved hand closing on the harness grip was that threshold. Volt did not bark. He did not growl first as a warning. A dog with his training does not warn twice. He came off the ground, in a single explosive movement, the nylon anchor line snapping rigid with a sound like a bat connecting with a fastball. He had calculated the tether's full radius precisely. His jaws closed on Nash's right forearm 6 inches above the wrist, the bite placement targeting the extensor muscle group between the 2 forearm bones rather than the artery beneath. It was not random. It was the same controlled apprehension technique used by federal fugitive recovery teams worldwide. Nash went backward, as if someone had cut his legs out from under him. He hit the asphalt flat-shouldered, with a sound that emptied the air from his chest, and came out the other side as a high, broken yell. Volt maintained the grip, 2 front paws planted squarely on Nash's chest, and stared directly into the man's face from 8 inches away. The sound that came from deep in the dog's chest was not a bark. It was a sustained vibration that existed below the register of human comfort, something felt in the sternum rather than heard with the ears. "He's got me! Get it off! Get it off of me!" Nash's voice had shed every note of swagger it had carried 30 seconds earlier. He was crying. He was genuinely, fully crying in the middle of a feed store parking lot. Grubb stepped back 3 feet without deciding to. The younger Vard employee turned away entirely, as if disavowing the situation. Clifton Vard did not step back. Clifton Vard reached inside his canvas vest and drew a blued Smith & Wesson .357 revolver. "Back that animal off, or I will put it down right now," he said. His voice carried a low, shaking quality that was not quite fear, but was something adjacent to it. The sound of a man accustomed to total control who can feel it leaving. He raised the barrel toward Volt's head. "Clifton." Cassidy moved laterally, putting herself at an angle where Clifton could see her without losing sight of Nash on the ground. "Lower the weapon. You pull the trigger on a federal MWD and you are looking at federal criminal charges. Not county, not state, federal. Think before you do something you cannot walk back." "This is my son on the ground," Clifton said. "Your son put his hand on a federal asset. Lower the weapon." The standoff held. Clifton's arm was steady, which was almost worse than trembling. It meant the intent was real and not dissolving. 2 people who had exited the store with feed bags stood motionless under the covered porch watching. Then a voice came from the north end of the building. It didn't carry any elevation in it. It wasn't loud. It held the kind of quiet weight that doesn't require volume because the frequency beneath it has already done the work. Volt aus Fuss. The effect on the dog was immediate and total. Volt released Nash's arm, backed precisely 2 paces, and dropped into a perfect heel position, body aligned, ears up, eyes forward, every muscle recalibrated from weapon to partner in under 3 seconds. Nash rolled to his side on the asphalt, clutching his forearm, his crying reduced now to a low, continuous sound. The man who came around the north corner of the building walked without hurry. He appeared to be in his late 30s, built rangy and economical in a faded canvas field jacket over a dark base layer and worn lace-up boots that had covered real terrain. His grey-green eyes moved in continuous, unhurried arcs across the lot, clocking Nash on the ground. Clifton's .357, Grubb's position, the store entrance, the angle to the Suburban, and his hands were open and relaxed at his sides. On his left jawline was a pale surgical scar, thin and white, running parallel to the scar on Volt's muzzle. The similarity between the 2 was not a coincidence. His name was Declan Rourke, former Delta Force Master Sergeant, 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in the Horn of Africa before transitioning to contracted federal operational work. He currently held credentials from the National Nuclear Security Administration, the agency under the Department of Energy responsible for, among other things, tracking, recovering, and securing radioactive material reported lost or stolen within U.S. borders. Declan walked to a point midway between Clifton and Nash, close enough to Volt that the dog could feel the warmth of him, and stopped. "Set the revolver on the hood of your truck," he said to Clifton. His tone held exactly as much emotion as a weather report. "The hell I will," Clifton said. "Your dog just destroyed my son's arm, and you're standing here." "Your son initiated contact with a federal operational K9, Declan said. "That's federal assault on government property, regardless of what he thought the dog was. You're also currently pointing a firearm at a federal contractor. You have about 4 seconds to make this better for yourself." Clifton's jaw tightened. The revolver stayed up. "Clifton," Cassidy said quietly from her position. She had moved again during Declan's approach, now at a 45-degree angle to Clifton's gun arm, outside his peripheral vision, requiring him to choose between tracking her and tracking Declan. "Look at the harness. Look at the credential clipped to his belt." Clifton's eyes moved involuntarily downward. Below the left edge of Declan's open jacket, clipped to his belt beside a compact radio unit, with an earpiece trailing up inside his collar, was a credential wallet bearing a brass badge and a laminated identification card carrying the Department of Energy seal. The revolver came down 3 inches, not all the way, but 3 inches. "NNSA," Declan said, as if answering a question Clifton hadn't managed to finish asking. "Not Fish and Game, not the county sheriff, nuclear security." Grubb said something under his breath that sounded like the beginning of a question he was afraid to complete. Clifton's face had moved from red to a mottled, uncertain grey. "Nuclear? What does nuclear have to do with a dog in a parking lot?" "Volt has a specialty," Declan said. Alongside his explosive and narcotic profiles, he was cross-trained for radioactive source detection in 2019. He works on isotope concentration differentials, primarily cesium-137 and cobalt-60, though his range extends across the full medical and industrial source catalogue. He looked at Clifton without blinking. "He has been alerting to the undercarriage of your rear transport truck since 7:50 this morning. He does not false alert. In 7 years of operational work, he has never once false alerted." The air in the parking lot seemed to change pressure. Cassidy could hear the wind moving through the pines at the lot's edge, a long, sustained sound like something being exhaled. "Your company's Route 9 transport," Declan continued, "made a pickup at the Lander Medical Supply liquidation site in Sandpoint 6 days ago. That site is the former location of a cancer treatment center that shuttered in 2019. Among the equipment transferred through that facility were 6 cesium-137 brachytherapy source assemblies that were never logged out through proper NRC's disposal channels. As of last Thursday, those 6 sources were listed as lost inventory. Volt found them this morning in the spare tire bay of your long-haul truck, sealed in lead-lined oilskin, which tells me whoever packed them knew exactly what they were handling." Clifton's arm dropped fully. The revolver hung forgotten at his side. "I don't know anything about any of that," he said, but the words came slowly, and there was nothing behind them. "The recorded phone authorization from your Route 9 logistics coordinator approving the Sandpoint pickup disagrees with you," Declan said, "as does the transport manifest your office fax to the liquidation site clearing the load." He took one measured step forward, put the weapon on the hood. This time Clifton did. Declan reached out without changing his expression, retrieved the revolver, pressed the cylinder release, rotated the cylinder free, palmed the rounds in one smooth motion, and returned the empty frame to the hood. The physical ease of it was more unsettling than any show of force could have been. "You've been routing stolen medical radioactive sources through federal timber corridors," Cassidy said, stepping forward. She had worked it through during Declan's second sentence. "The liquidation sites. Your company holds the corridor permits. Nobody questions a timber truck. You're the transportation layer." Clifton looked at her with a raw, helpless fury. "You're a game warden," he said. "She told you not to touch the dog," Declan said. "You should have listened to her." From the south, a sound was building through the tree line, the layered wail of multiple vehicles approaching at speed. Red and blue light bars began pulsing through the pine cover a quarter-mile out, washing the grey October sky in alternating color. 3 dark federal SUVs and 2 Clearwater County Sheriff's cruisers came in hard and spread across the lot entrance, and the agents who stepped out moved with the tight, coordinated precision of a team that had been waiting for exactly this signal. They wore ballistic vests and carried sidearms, and their jackets read NNSA, FBI, and Clearwater CO Sheriff in white and gold lettering. The staging position on Route 12 had been in place since before Declan parked the Suburban. Nash Vard was on his feet now, his right arm wrapped in a preliminary pressure bandage a federal tactical medic had applied with practiced speed. All of his swagger had evacuated so completely it was difficult to remember it had ever been present. He stood in the gravel with his jaw set and his eyes red, looking at the ground. Special Agent Renata Cole, NNSA Field Operations, crossed the lot and extended a gloved hand to Declan. "The transport truck's already flagged at the Route 9 way station," she said. "Radiological team is suiting up now. Preliminary source count is consistent with 6 assemblies, possibly 8. Volt caught the scent through a steel spare mount and a rubber liner at 20 yards, Declan said. Agent Cole looked down at the Malinois, who sat perfectly still at Declan's left heel, with his eyes moving calmly across the arriving personnel, assessing each one. "Remarkable dog," she said. "He's earned the word," Declan replied. Clifton was already in the custody of 2 county deputies, his hands behind him, his Stetson still somehow on his head. He stood against the door of his truck watching the federal team work, and something had gone out of his face. Not just the anger, but the underlying architecture the anger had been built on. 30 years of being the largest force in any room, gone. "I've got relationships with 2 county commissioners," he said to no one in particular. "I've got a state representative who owes me 3 favors. You think you can walk into my county with some federal lapdog and a—" "Save it," Agent Cole said without looking at him. She handed a thick folder to one of her agents. "Grand jury date is already on the calendar, Clifton. We've been building this case since May." Cassidy was standing near the Suburban, watching the federal team establish their perimeter, when she heard the sound. It came from the narrow alley between the store's back wall and the equipment rental shed, a fast metallic clatter followed by a voice, high and cracked with panic. She turned before the sound finished registering. Ike Grubb had made his calculation during the chaos of the federal arrival. He'd retreated into the back alley, and there he'd found Cassidy's 22-year-old field intern, Becca Salt, who had been unloading equipment bags from the fish and wildlife truck and had drifted toward the back of the building to stay clear of what looked like a rapidly escalating confrontation. Grubb had a short, heavy ratchet handle in his right fist, and his left arm locked around Becca's neck from behind, pressing her against the shed's steel doorframe. "Nobody takes another step," Grubb screamed. His voice had the cracked, overloaded pitch of a man who has done the arithmetic and found no exit that doesn't cost him everything. "I'm walking to the south lot and getting in my truck and driving out of here, or I start swinging this thing right now. Everybody back up. All of you, back up." Becca's hands were at Grubb's forearm, her face pale and rigid. She wasn't fighting him. She was smart enough not to fight, but her eyes found Cassidy's across the lot with the particular focused calm of someone choosing to trust rather than panic. The federal agents froze mid-step, running rapid tactical recalculations. A hostage situation with a blunt force weapon in a crowded lot with multiple civilians. Weapons up, angles bad, no clean position. Grubb's eyes were cycling too fast. Clifton, the agents, the exits, Nash driveway. He was watching too many things at once, which meant his attention was thin everywhere. Cassidy moved. Not toward Grubb, laterally into his direct sightline, pulling his focus to her like a hand pulling a loose thread. "Ike," she said. Not sharp, conversational, the voice she used with a spooked elk on a hillside when she needed 30 seconds to get into position. Becca's a college student doing a semester internship. She drove up from Boise 2 weeks ago. She doesn't know anything about Vard Timber, doesn't know anything about the radioactive sources, wasn't present for any of what happened in this lot today. She kept walking, slow and lateral, drawing his eyes across. You let her go right now, and the hostage charge stays out of your file entirely. You keep holding her, and nothing Clifton's lawyers can ever do will touch what they'll put on you. Not in a federal courtroom, not on a charge like this. I said back up, Grubb said, but his eyes had already tracked to her voice. That was the moment. Volt, Declan said at the volume you'd use to tell someone to pass the salt. Then, just barely below breath, Fass. Volt moved low. He didn't cross the open lot at a run. He went along the equipment shed wall, using the shadow cast by the propane rack, covering ground in a broken, weaving approach that kept him entirely out of Grubb's peripheral field until the last 6 feet. 7 years of this work had reduced the geometry to pure instinct. He launched from behind Grubb's right side, twisting in the air with the fluid logic of a body that has performed this motion enough times that it no longer requires thought, and his jaws closed on Grubb's right knee joint. The ratchet handle went up and then away, spinning harmlessly into the gravel 20 feet to the left. Grubb collapsed sideways. Becca stumbled forward, and Cassidy was already there. She had been walking toward that exact position the entire time, and had Becca by the arm and behind her before Grubb hit the ground. 2 federal agents were on Grubb before Volt had fully released, and the Malinois stepped back on a hand signal from Declan, shook his head once, and returned to heel with the efficiency of someone completing a routine task. The silence that followed was a different kind than what had come before it. This one had weight, the weight of something genuinely, finally finished. Becca stood behind Cassidy with both hands pressed flat against her own sternum, pulling breath, and then she looked up and said, with more steadiness than most 22-year-olds could have produced in that moment, I wasn't panicking. I was waiting for an opening. I know, Cassidy said. You did exactly right. Clearwater County Sheriff Ben Alt came out from the store entrance, where he had taken a position with a clear sight line during the second escalation. He crossed the lot to Clifton Vard, regarded the man for a long moment without speaking, and then said, Clifton, your family has been pushing past what this county will tolerate since your father's time. I should have pushed back harder, sooner. That's a failure on my part as much as yours. He put a firm hand on the man's arm. Let's go. The federal vehicles loaded methodically. Nash was in the rear of a sheriff's cruiser, still cradling his right arm, his Stetson sitting crooked on his head. Grubb was in a second cruiser, his face against the window. Clifton walked to the transport van without speaking again, and the van pulled out of the lot in a wide, deliberate arc. When the lot had quieted to the sound of investigators working the Suburban and the Vard long-haul truck, Cassidy crossed to where Declan and Volt stood near the Suburban's rear quarter. She crouched down, slow and easy, and offered the back of her hand the way she had been trained to do and had trained others to do after her. Volt looked up at Declan. Declan gave the small nod, barely a tilt of the chin, a gesture so minimal it might have been missed by someone who wasn't watching for it. The Malinois extended his muzzle and worked his nose across her knuckles with deliberate, careful attention. Then he rested his chin in her palm. He favors his left rear, Cassidy said quietly. Her eyes were on the way the dog distributed his weight, the subtle shift he made when he settled. Old injury? Declan looked down at Volt. Roadside device. Logar Province, 2020. He took shrapnel in the hind quarters. The scar tissue pulls when the weather drops. He was quiet for a moment. He has never once slowed down because of it. Of course he hasn't. She scratched gently behind the dog's unscarred ear. Volt's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. the briefest concession to comfort from an animal that had spent its entire life holding everything in reserve. Is he still active service? Not as of this morning, Declan said. His discharge paperwork cleared at 0600. Today was his final operational assignment. He looked out at the mountain line to the north, the long, pale ridgeline holding its first thin rim of early snow. He's earned whatever comes next, whatever that turns out to look like. Cassidy was quiet for a moment. What does it look like? She asked. Declan looked at her. There was something in his storm-grey eyes that wasn't closed off so much as unaccustomed to being read directly. Still working that out, he said. She stood, brushing gravel dust from her knees. Clearwater County is a reasonable place to work things out, she said. The Fish and Wildlife District has 500 square miles of federal land that needs coverage every single day. The clinic in Elk Ridge has a veterinarian who's spent 15 years specializing in retired working dogs. She knows the difference between a dog that needs rest and a dog that needs purpose. She looked at him steadily. And the winters up here are long and genuinely quiet. Good things can happen in that kind of quiet, if you know how to be still long enough to let them. Declan looked down at Volt, then back at Cassidy Farlow. I think I'm going to need that vet's number, he said. I think I can make that happen, she said. Agent Cole walked past them with a clipboard, glanced at the two of them and the dog standing between them, and said nothing at all. But the expression on her face said quite a lot. The overcast broke for the first time all morning, just a single pale bar of late October light angling low across the cracked asphalt, but it landed across Volt's scarred muzzle and lit the black and tan of his coat briefly gold. He blinked into it once and held still, the way animals do when they have been running for a very long time, and finally, without ceremony or announcement, understand that the running is done.